person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So, he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. By thoughts, I mean specifically chatter in the skull, perpetual and compulsive repetition of words, of reckoning and calculating. I'm not saying that thinking is bad. Like everything else, it's useful in moderation. A good servant, but a bad master. And all so-called civilized peoples have increasingly become crazy and self-destructive because through excessive thinking they have lost touch with reality. That's to say, we confuse signs with the real world.
First real time that I tried magic mushrooms is when I was in college, and it was the first real experience for me. Going to this college was a big thing for me, leaving home and seeing something new and stuff like that. So everything was kind of like a first experience. So with this came mushrooms. I was with a bunch of friends, but we all have made a plan to go out for a hike, that we were going to go up to this nice little trail. And I think a lot of like tourists and things that come to that type of region, they would always hike up there. And at the top, it had a really nice view. So it's a great idea and it's a good plan. So we all decided to hang out, eat them, and we waited for a while for them to kind of kick in, or we kind of timed it in the right way when we should have left. So it was pretty interesting when it first started happening, because we did time it half an hour. So by the time it was like maybe 25 minutes or 20 minutes, we decided to leave the house, and it was getting pretty dark out. So it was pretty nice, and the moon was out and it was really bright. So it was almost like the whole bush was lit up. And you could see like the silhouettes of the trees, like the black and the white contrast, like against each other. So it was already like a really nice atmosphere to start tripping out. And then while I was walking up the hill with my friends, that's when I kind of noticed like that I was kind of feeling like a little bit more happier, or like I felt more anxious and excited. And when I would look around, I noticed like shadows and everything within my atmosphere started changing. And yeah, it was like our shadows were following us, but it was almost like everything was like 2 or 3 seconds slower than us, like our shadows. That's what it felt like. So like it literally felt like we like we were being chased by our shadows, but it was funny anyway. And like I think as soon as we went up to the viewpoint on top of the hill, that was probably the cherry on top, yeah. But when we went up there and we could see the view of like the little village where we were at school, it was nice. Everything was like twinkling, and like all the sky, like the sky was like out full of stars, and it was really nice. Everything was just like twinkling and beautiful. It felt like you could see almost every star in the sky, and it was a lot of fun. We were kind of like just jumping around, and But yeah, that was my first experience with mushrooms. It was a pretty good one.
The word psychonaut has two components, both of which come from ancient Greek. The prefix psyche means spirit, soul, or mind, while the suffix naut pertains to sailing. Therefore, the most common definition of a psychonaut is a sailor of the soul. These people deliberately enter altered states of consciousness to explore the hidden depths of the human psyche, although the word usually describes people who use psychedelic drugs.
My name is Jeff Lebowe. I'm a lifelong mycophile, which is someone that is very interested in mushrooms. I'm also the founder of Spores Lab, which is the leading Canadian provider of mushroom genetics, mushroom growing mediums, mushroom growing equipment, and mycology consulting services. So teaching people how to grow mushrooms. Spores Lab was founded almost a year ago now in April 2020. And my partners and I noticed a void in the Canadian market for mushroom genetics. Now, there's quite a few websites out there selling actual dried mushrooms, but there's a distinct lack of vendors selling genetics. And there's also a distinct lack of quality information out there on how to grow mushrooms. So that's something that we really focused on, is not only selling the products, but also teaching people how to grow. So as the director of Spores Lab, I kind of wear a few hats, so to speak, but mostly I'm responsible for the online stuff. So that's website development, marketing, customer service, social media, SEO, stuff along those lines. But that being said, I still do spend a fair amount of time in the laboratory. I've been interested in fungi for a long time. I feel like they're kind of an obscure kingdom of organisms that most people don't know very much about, but they do have significant impact on pretty much every aspect of our lives, although we don't realize it. Fungi, they're crucial in the development of many medicines. They're responsible for decomposing and recycling nutrients on a massive scale, on such a large scale that without fungi, all of the ecosystems that we have on Earth would not exist. So I think it's the fact that they're so crucial, but they get such little attention, that initially drew me to be interested. And then my interest was held because they really are interesting organisms. Fungi are actually some of the oldest organisms on the planet. And it's actually it's not known for certain how they originated, or even if they originated on Earth. There's some hypotheses that suggest that spores first came to Earth on an asteroid. But based on fossil records, it's thought that the first fungi started to grow about 2.4 billion years ago. So that's about 2 billion years before plants were growing on land. And fungi split from the animal branch of the tree of life about 1.5 billion years ago. And that split happened when animals started to encapsulate nutrients in a sac for digestion. And that sac would be what has evolved into a stomach. But fungi continued to digest at a cellular level. So yeah, that was 1.5 billion years ago when that split occurred. And actually, despite being such old organisms, the kingdom of fungi was actually classified in 1969.
Psychoactive mushrooms have been used in therapeutic, spiritual, and ceremonial use by human society since time immemorial. From different parts of the globe, tribal societies and ancient civilizations were repeatedly documented to revere psychedelic mushrooms and have used them in ceremonial, spiritual, and therapeutic contexts for millennia. Psilocybin mushrooms are fungi that contain the psychoactive compound psilocybin. According to Third Wave, psilocybin is a naturally occurring psychedelic compound capable of producing powerful hallucinations and mystical-type experiences, along with other effects. Colloquially known as magic mushrooms or shrooms, these entheogenic fungi can be found on every habitable continent.
Psilocybin is a psychoactive prodrug that is found in over 200 species of mushrooms. It's a prodrug because when it's ingested, it is dephosphorylated by the body into another drug called psilocin. And interestingly, psilocin is actually what's responsible for the psychoactive effects. So psilocin has a very similar chemical structure to serotonin, and it's able to bind with several serotonin receptors, most notably the 5-HT2A receptor group. And when that bond is made, that's what causes the mind-altering effects.
The amplified stimulation causes you to perceive and experience things without any stimulus, also known as hallucination. These range from visual to auditory sensations or insightful and mystical feelings. This could explain effects like synesthesia, a perceptual phenomenon of mixing sensory modalities such as hearing colors or tasting sounds that is usually experienced during mushroom trips. Experts believe that this triggers what they call neuronal avalanching. This is essentially a domino effect of different and various changes in the brain. Increased activity in the visual cortex causes changes in your perception. Meanwhile, psilocybin dampens our default mode network, which leads to a loss of ego. One important effect that psilocybin creates is the increase in connectivity among different regions of the brain. Scientists believe that the combination of these effects makes psilocybin very effective in treating depression and addiction. When areas in the brain who don't normally interact with each other start communicating while under the effects of psilocybin, one might have new insights into old problems. Scientists have also suggested that the brain may temporarily rearrange itself under the effects of psilocybin by inhibiting normal brain activity and immediately creating new biologically stable brain connections. This alters our perception, making it difficult to determine reality from fantasy, and amplifies your intensity of thought, making planning ahead and self-conscious thinking almost impossible. In 1992, Terence McKenna, an American ethnobotanist and psychedelics advocate, argued in the book Food for the Gods that early hominids ingested psilocybin mushrooms, which allowed them to, quote-unquote, think outside the box, and enabled Homo erectus to evolve into Homo sapiens. He called this the stoned ape hypothesis. According to McKenna, psilocybin caused the primitive brain's information processing capabilities to expeditiously reorganize, which ignited the rapid expansion of cognition that led to early language, technology, and art discovered in Homo sapiens archaeological records. McKenna stated that as early humans, we ate our way to higher consciousness by ingesting these entheogens. Psilocybin brought humanity out of the animal mind and into the world of articulated speech and imagination.
Terence McKenna's stoned ape hypothesis suggests that magic mushrooms had significant effect on human development, specifically the doubling of the human brain size in about just over 1 million years, which in evolutionary terms is a quite short period of time.
Some early concrete evidence was found deep within the mountain ranges of Tassili, Algeria, where more than 15,000 ancient rock drawings and engravings depicting animal migrations, climatic changes, and the evolution of human life on the edge of the Sahara from 6000 BC all the way to the first centuries of our present era. Some of the carvings found in Tassili were unusually large-headed, others without strict form, even appearing to be missing some body parts. There are some figures that depict floating in space or having an out-of-body experience. It has been estimated by historians that they were made anywhere between 4,000 to 7,000 years BC, during that time of prehistoric rock art known as the Roundhead period. Another cave art in Tassili depicts one of the oldest known petroglyphs of psychoactive mushrooms. The Tassili mushroom figure, Matalem Amazar, more commonly known in the psychedelic community as the bee-faced mushroom shaman, depicts a shaman covered in mushrooms.
There's also some historians who suggest that several ancient civilizations, most notably the Egyptians and the Greeks, used psychoactive mushrooms. And some of these historians even think that the Egyptians were trying to cultivate mushrooms.
Evidence of the use of ethnogenic substances such as psychedelic fungi were also discovered in philosophically and scientifically advanced ancient civilizations like the Egyptians, Greeks, and the Romans. In ancient Greece, ritual ceremonies in reverence for the goddess Demeter involved the use of a psychoactive brew called Kikion. This brew gave cults who attended these ceremonies intensely powerful psychedelic experiences. These ritualistic psychedelic ceremonies were known as the Eleusinian Mysteries and were shrouded in secrecy. Exposing the knowledge gained during ceremonies resulted in a death penalty, making these transformational rites somewhat exclusive, often attended by members of the upper class and preeminent scholars, artists, and philosophers, such as Aristotle, Homer, and Plato. The ancient Egyptians also created numerous forms of art that shows mushrooms and had vernacular terms for the psychoactive varieties, translating to sons of the gods or food of the gods. Ancient Egyptians believed that since mushrooms did not sprout from seed, they were placed on earth by Osiris, the god of the underworld, fertility, and the embodiment of the dead and resurrected king. Therefore, the consumption of these entheogens were limited to priesthood and upper classes. Egyptologist Stephen Berlant theorized that ancient Egyptians cultivated these mushrooms on barley grain, indicating how spiritually and culturally significant their use was. Statues and rock paintings and the like were discovered in Mayan and Aztec cultures in what appears to be depictions of hallucinogenic mushrooms. They are said to have used entheogenic substances such as psychedelic mushrooms to commune with the gods, while their nomenclature gives more insight into their rituals. The Nahuatl language used by the Mayan and Aztec people called these mushrooms Tionanacatl, which translates to flesh of the gods.
As a modern history of psilocybin mushrooms, that more or less began in the late 1950s with the publication of a Life magazine article called Seeking the Magic Mushroom. And that article was written by a guy named R. Gordon Wasson, who was actually a banker, but he had a deep interest in mycology, and he was a hobbyist mycologist. And he got to go to the Mazatec region of Mexico and participate in an indigenous mushroom ceremony. And he wrote about it in that Life magazine article.
The Mazatec, where legendary shaman Maria Sabina hails from, is an indigenous group from the Oaxaca region of southern Mexico. Wasson experienced Maria Sabina's healing sacred mushroom ceremonies called veladas. This led to the popularization of indigenous Mexican ritual use of psychoactive mushrooms among Westerners. The news proliferated quickly, and this brought magic mushrooms into the mainstream public eye for the first time. During the peak of the 60s psychedelic era, a huge number of hippies and fringe groups headed to Mexico to seek out Maria Sabina. Among those rumored visitors were celebrities such as John Lennon, Keith Richards, and Bob Dylan.
And that really kick-started psilocybin's history in the quote-unquote Western world. He brought back a bunch of samples of mushrooms from his trip, and he sent those to several chemists. One of those chemists was Albert Hofmann, who's most famous for the discovery of LSD. And Hofmann was able to isolate the psychoactive compounds, psilocybin and psilocin. And interestingly, the company that Hofmann worked for, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, actually sold psilocybin for a short period before it was made illegal. I sold it under the name Indocybin.
During the 1960s counterculture, the use of psychedelic drugs became widespread until they were ultimately outlawed in the 1970s with former United States President Richard Nixon's launch of the War on Drugs.
The UN Psychotropic Substances Act came into effect in the early 1970s and effectively prohibited psilocybin mushrooms along with a bunch of other naturally occurring psychedelic substances. So that legislation coming about really put a halt to a lot of the research that was going on, and that it resulted in about a 30-year hiatus in the research into psilocybin mushrooms. That research started to pick up again in the late 1990s. The first post-drug war study was conducted at the University of Zurich in Switzerland.
A team of researchers led by Dr. Franz Vollenweider explored whether brain function under psilocybin was consistent with the brain function of patients diagnosed with chronic schizophrenia. They discovered that there was significant contrast between the two brain states. They also found out that brain activity was increased in many areas of the brain and that it had dampening effects on the ego-influenced default mode network. DMN, or the default mode network, is a network in our brains that has been shown to be crucial in normal, everyday consciousness. The DMN is a loose connection between different areas of the brain and neuron groups that communicate together to help us function.
Since then, research into these mushrooms has increased exponentially to the point where we are now, where there's multiple companies, publicly traded companies, that have licenses to research.
The study catalyzed research at numerous other institutions, such as the Beckley Foundation, the Hefter Institute, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Toronto, to name a few. This subsequent research found the efficacy of psilocybin in the treatment of a myriad of psychological problems, as well as chronic pain, from cluster headaches to neuralgia. In 2018, researchers at Johns Hopkins University confirmed that psilocybin mushrooms can be used medicinally to treat conditions such as depression, PTSD, anxiety, and addiction. In November of 2020, Numinous Wellness Incorporated, an integrated mental health company, announced its planning of clinical trials for psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for substance use-related disorders. Originally established as a cannabis technology company, Numinous has also focused on the development, research, and delivery of safe, evidence-based, accessible, psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. Their research will enable the company to analyze and refine protocols for the use of psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for participants with various substance use disorders. According to Health Canada's Special Access Program, such compassionate access, single-arm, open-label clinical trials can be incorporated into drug development planning to meet the needs of the patients who are not eligible for enrollment in other pivotal trials. This means that the program would help patients gain access to drugs that are not yet available on the market. In 2021, Thomas Hartle became the first terminally ill cancer patient in Canada to legally use psilocybin mushrooms to treat his anxiety. Hartle, a Saskatchewan resident who has stage 4 terminal colon cancer, received a 1-year exemption from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act last August, so he could use psilocybin during psychotherapy. Since then, Health Canada has approved 24 more applications from cancer patients for the treatment of end-of-life distress. They also granted exemptions to 19 healthcare providers, allowing them to possess and use psilocybin mushrooms for professional training purposes.
There definitely has been a surge over the past few years. I think there's a few reasons behind it. Firstly, they've been shown to be more effective than any pharmaceutical equivalent in treating many mental health conditions. Caveat when combined with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. But yeah, the instances of depression and anxiety and PTSD and a whole host of other mental health conditions have been increasing for a long time. And the current drugs that are used to treat these conditions are not terribly effective. So I think researchers have been looking for a long time for a drug that is more effective. And now that the regulatory environment around psychedelics is shifting and allowing more research, it's looking more and more like psychedelics, and psilocybin in specific is that more effective drug.
Despite these results and findings, psilocybin is still listed as a Schedule I drug, a category reserved for compounds that have no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. But as far as scientists know, long-term use of psilocybin doesn't damage the brain compared to other drugs. And according to a study by the Global Drug Survey, magic mushrooms are the safest recreational drug out there. In 2018, only 0.3% of people who reported taking shrooms needed medical attention, compared to 1.3% of people for alcohol. The possible decriminalization and legalization of psychedelic mushrooms and its scientifically quantifiable medical benefits raise the importance of fair access to magic mushrooms. In recent times, although still illegal, magic mushrooms are easily accessed online, as numerous websites exist offering shrooms online. In the near future, we can expect more research and clinical studies validating and expanding upon the findings of previous research on psilocybin mushrooms. The proven efficacy of these entheogenic substances in treating psychological conditions has served to scientifically authenticate what our ancient ancestors and shamanistic societies have known for centuries.